What's up, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also, if you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another Mafia topic. And over the last 20 years, in the city that never sleeps, New York, there may have not been a bigger lunatic in the Bonanno crime family over today's subject. An individual that rose from the streets of the Bronx and Yonkers, took over in thievish ways, made money, and ultimately became the boss of the Bonanno crime family. The story of Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano next on Sit Down Shorts. Vincent Basciano was born November 14th, 1959 in Yonkers, New York. During his teenage years, it was told that Vincent Basciano got his start very early. And he would actually come to the aid of a young kid in the Bronx. The kid was being bullied, and Vinny Gorgeous decided to intervene. That caught the attention of that child's family member, Dominic Big Trin Trinchera, who took a liking to the young Basciano. Basciano began driving him around, and as we know, at that point, Big Trin was a heavyweight in the Bonnano family. He would slot in with a group called the Three Capos: Philip Lucky Giancone, Alphonse Sonny Red and Delicato, and Big Trin would try to gain power in the Bonanno family. And as we know, those three would ultimately be killed in a murder known as a Three Capos hit. So for Vinny Gorgeous, he was regularly seen around with Big Trin. He was seen at weddings. A lot of people started to wonder, who was this young baby-faced kid hanging around with a bunch of mobsters? He would later be identified as Vincent Basciano. Now, upon the murder of Big Trin in the early 80s, Vinny Basciano was already starting to become known as a kid hanging on in the neighborhood. He would slot in and start hanging out with Tony Colangelo. Now, Colangelo was a Mafia associate and ran a large bookmaking operation in the Bronx on an area called Pleasant Avenue. Now, Tony Cole was known throughout the neighborhood and was said to have a huge numbers and gambling operation. Now, Vincent Basciano came on as a bit of a protege of Tony Cole. He started making collections. He started making the business easier on Tony Cole. By the mid-'80s, Tony Cole was facing an indictment, and by this point, he was happy with where his business stood. He would call on Vinny Gorgeous to take care of collections and run the operation while he was in prison. The only ask he would have of young Basciano was that he took care of his girlfriend, who at the time was expecting checks each week. Now, on the surface, it worked. Vinny Gorgeous was kicking up around $5,000 to the girlfriend, and everything was going swimmingly. But by the time of the end of the incarceration, a very smart Vinny Gorgeous started to realize, you know what? If I just get rid of Tony Cole, I can keep all the money instead of kicking it up to a girlfriend. Tony Cole would eventually be released from prison. And in 1987, Tony Colangelo would tell his family that day in May that he was going to go hang out with the kids. The kids would be referring to Vincent Basciano and his friend Anthony Donato, who began palling around with Basciano. That day, Tony Colangelo was not seen again. And in June of 1987, a passerby driver in the area of Greenburgh, New York, would locate a body in a black bag. It was the body of Tony Colangelo. So basically what happened was, allegedly, Vinny Gorgeous would off Tony Cole and take over his big gambling operation. And this was good for Vinny Gorgeous because this was a way for him to start to show himself, his panache for the Bonanno family, and start to show that he could earn, he could make money. With that money, he began to acquire businesses. He would operate a Blimpie restaurant in the Bronx. He would also own a salon called Hello Gorgeous. Now, obviously, if you know anything about Vincent Basciano, this is where he would garner his very popular nickname, Vinny Gorgeous. Things are going well for Vinny Gorgeous. He was making money. He had gotten married by this point, and he would move his burgeoning family in the late 80s and early 90s out of the Bronx and into Westchester County, an area called Scarsdale, a very uppity, posh suburb where he would raise his family. Now, by this point, Vinny Gorgeous is starting to be known around town. And in the Bronx, he would start to partner with this individual, Patty from the Bronx DeFilippo. Now, DeFilippo had gone back in the Bonnano family for many years. His father was very close to Joe Bonnano. Now, for Patrick DeFilippo, he knew that this connection would be a burgeoning one. He knew that if he slotted in with Vinny Gorgeous, they could basically be the eyes and ears for the Bonnano family in the Bronx. They both ran bookmaking operations, and this would mean that for the most part, bookmaking in Yonkers and the Bronx was basically in the hands of Vinny Gorgeous and Patty from the Bronx. Now, Patty from the Bronx would start to introduce Vincent Basciano to some high-ranking friends. He would be seen on government surveillance, Vinny Gorgeous, around the haunts in Maspeth, Queens, of Joseph Big Joey Messino, who by this point was a very high up in the family and basically was the boss of the family. I've said before, and I'll say it again, Joe Messino is arguably, as a boss, one of the best bosses over the last 30 years in the American mob. Now, we know he cooperates, and we'll talk about that, but we can't knock how good of a boss Joe Messino was. He really stabilized the family, and by the 90s, he was the most powerful boss in the American Mafia. Now, for Vinny Gorgeous, things would start to hit the skids, though. And while he was making a lot of money, he had the Blimpie restaurant, he had a big home up in Scarsdale. One of his former cohorts, an individual called Alfred Fat Al Batone, would get his door kicked in. In August of 1991, Batone, who was an associate of Basciano and the Lucchese crime family through bookmaking, would get his door kicked in by the federal government. They would allege he was part of a very powerful drug organization run by Eric Milan Colon. Now, Milan Colon was from Manhattan, and the feds would allege he would run a drug group that was pushing out almost 100% pure heroin, and they would dub it Blue Thunder. Now, Milan Colon was a huge drug dealer, and the feds would allege that during a 5-year period, his cohorts and him were pushing about $100 million worth of heroin onto New York streets. They would also contend that Batone was very involved with this drug conspiracy. They would connect it back to old pal Vincent Basciano, who the Fed started to realize by this point, how is he making all this money? And maybe he was a financer in this Borgata. Now, hours later, Vincent Basciano would get his Scarsdale home's door kicked in as well. Now, the feds would find a treasure trove of money, about $230,000. Vincent Basciano would tell the feds that he had won that money gambling. So Vincent Basciano would have to face really his first case. He had also had to face a case back in the 80s involving an individual named David Rivera. The feds would allege that Vincent Basciano, alongside DeFilippo and Donato, would shoot a numbers runner called David Nunez. Now, ultimately, David Nunez would recant a statement, and Vincent Basciano wouldn't face any problems. But this was the first real case that Vinny Gorgeous would have to face in federal court. He would call upon the services of high-end defense attorney Ben Braffman. Now, in the first trial of this Blue Thunder case, the feds thought they had some good information. They would catch Vincent Basciano on tape around the time that these folks were arrested. They started to notice helicopters outside the home. Basciano would be caught on tape telling Batone, quote, "We've got some problems, pal." They would also hear other connections made between Batone and Basciano. Now, Braffman would allege a lot of the time that that was just the fact that they had known each other in bookmaking circles, and there was no proof that that was related to drug talk. Now, the good thing for Basciano was in the first trial, the case would be thrown out. That wouldn't mean, though, that Vincent Basciano wouldn't have to face trial. He would, though, ultimately be acquitted in this case. He was actually one of only two people that would actually be acquitted in this case. He, alongside the son of Alfred Batone, Anthony, would be found not guilty in this case. The feds, beyond a reasonable doubt, could not prove that Vincent Basciano was involved in any drug trafficking. Now, as we know, though, with the Bonnano family, they have always very much been involved in the drug trade. But again, in the court of law, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and they could not do that in the case of Vincent Basciano. So things are going great for Vinny Gorgeous. He is making his ascent, and in 1991, it is alleged by the federal government that Vincent Basciano, in a ceremony in a Greenpoint, Brooklyn home, was inducted in to the Bonanno Crime Family. He would be sponsored by his pal, Patty from the Bronx, DeFilippo, and he would have a spot inside the family. Now, in 1992, which in a video we've talked about, this couple, Rosemary and Thomas Uva, were robbing Mob Social Club. Now, Vinny Gorgeous' name would pop up again inside the Bonanno family. Once these two are taken out by the Gambino crime family, there's questions around New York. Who killed the Bonnie and Clyde duo? Bonanno family boss Joe Massino wanted answers. He had heard around town that it was his family that took care of this piece of work. Patty from the Bronx, DeFilippo, would tell Joey Massino that it was Donato and Basciano that took the pair out. They had told DeFilippo they took care of this piece of work. Joe Massino is approached by the Gotti regime, including John Jr. Gotti, and he's basically flummoxed and thought that his family carried out the piece of work. Somebody was lying, and that was Patty from the Bronx, DeFilippo, who believed his two young henchmen that they took care of the piece of work. Now, nothing would ultimately happen to Basciano or Donato for telling tall tales, but this would become kind of problematic for DeFilippo, who I don't think was ever truly respected after this by big Joey Massino. Now, Basciano would continue to make his ascent. He would make more and more money under DeFilippo. He was owning businesses. He was getting involved with construction, and people were turning up dead. Now, what Basciano was starting to do as well was he was assembling a bit of a crew below him. Slotting in was Dom Cicchelli. He would also grab some hanger-ons from the Giannini crew, an individual called Anthony Aiello. I've done a video on Aiello, and I urge you to check it out, which we'll talk about here in just a second. In 2002, after Patty from the Bronx is jammed up, Vincent Basciano becomes the captain in the Bonnano family of Patty from the Bronx's crew. He is becoming a very important figure in the Bonanno crime family. The problem for the Bonannos was good things never last forever, and the feds are closing in on big Joey Massino. Now, to this point in the Bonanno family, they do not have any informants. This family is run well by Joe Massino. The problem was the hammer starts to come down. Frank Coppa cooperates, Richard Cantarella cooperates, and he starts talking about everybody in the family. In January of 2003, big Joey Massino is arrested at his home. Also jammed up is his brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitale, and other members of the Bonanno crime family. At the arrest of Joey Massino, he would ask FBI agent Jeffrey Sillett, quote, "Did you pick up Sal as well?" Sillett would respond, "Yes, we picked up Sal Vitale." I think a lot of people started to worry about Salvatore Vitale's testimony and whether he would bring in his brother-in-law and the rest of the family. People were worried. One person, though, that was not worried was Vincent Basciano. I think Basciano realized that his number may quite be called. He had become a leader in the family, and Vinny Gorgeous realized that he would probably get a power position. Once Massino and Vitale goes away, the daily running of the family would be involved in a three-person triumvirate. One of the main decision makers was this individual, Anthony Tony Green Urso. Now, Tony Green was a confidant of Big Joey Messino and really kind of an errand boy for Joey. He realized that he could probably run the family. Now, Tony Urso would actually be caught on camera and on tape at one point once Sal Vitali's learned that he's a cooperator. And this would get Tony Urso jammed up. In the testimony and in that recording, Tony Urso would say, quote, "Now this one's a rat. Well, fuck it. He can do it. I can do it. You tell them whoever turns will wipe your family out. If you take one kid, I hate to say it, I got to do what I got to do. They'll fucking think twice. How would Sal feel if I killed one of his kids?" Now, ultimately, that would jam him up because one of the individuals in that conversation would actually flip as well. And Tony Green would be taken off the streets as well in 2004. Now, this would be good news for Vinny Gorgeous. At that point, he would assume control of the Bonanno crime family. So he goes from saving a kid on the street who was being bullied all the way to the top of the Bonanno crime family. Now, the Joe Messino trial would begin in May of 2004, and not one, not two, not five, but 7 informants would testify against Big Joey Messino. And on July 30th, 2004, Joey Messino would be found guilty of multiple murders and would face the death penalty. As we know, subsequently, as soon as he's convicted, he decides, I want to speak to Agent Jeff Sillett, who by this point they had believed that Joey Messino had become pretty close to Sillett. He would ask to speak with the judge. And at that point, Joe Messino does the unthinkable. He decides to cooperate against his Bonnano cohorts. Now, Sillett and the FBI were smart. They realized that Joey Messino was now going to face life, and he would be in a holding at MDC for a long period of time. Things are starting to come together for the FBI, and they realized, you know what? We have Big Joey Messino. Let's wire him up for sound. And Basciano would ultimately be arrested in November of 2004. So they realized, hey, let's kick this up a notch and let's try to get him on tape here. So they would wire him for sound. The problem and what happened and allegedly and down the road for Vinny Gorgeous is by this point, he had been known around town as a wild child, but he was a smart, manipulative guy who made a lot of money and became a powerful dude. The problem was he went off the deep end, and people started to tell Vinny Gorgeous before he was arrested, hey, maybe you should stop killing people. People were starting to turn up dead. And in December of 2004, he would ask underlings, Dom Cicchelli and Michael Mancuso, as well as Anthony Aiello, to take care of an individual that had disrespected him on the street. Now, in the video that I put out a couple of weeks ago, we would talk about the murder in December of 2004 of Randolph Pizzola. Now, keep in mind the timeline here. Many of the people involved in this crime would try to tell Vinny Gorgeous, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill people right now. The boss of this family's on trial. Maybe we shouldn't do this. And they would try to stall for a long period of time. Once Messino is found guilty and gets life, they say to Basciano, okay, we'll do it now, blah, 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 blah. And in December of 2004, on this street of Monitor in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, Randy Pizzola is killed. Now, the government gets Joey Messino, as I said, wired up. He runs into the bullpen and starts talking to Vinny Gorgeous. He would ask Vinny Gorgeous about the hit on Randy Pizzola. And Messino, in his testimony, in his cooperation, Taryn Merkel, the prosecutor, would ask him, quote, have you ever had a discussion with a member of the Bonnano family about what happened to Randy Pizzola? Messino would respond with, quote, yes, I have, with Vincent Basciano. He told me he had Randy killed in 2004. Okay, what year did you have that conversation with? Messino would respond in 2004. He would say we had it at the MDC detention center in Brooklyn. He would be asked by Merkel, quote, did Vincent Basciano tell you why he killed Randy Pizzola? Messino would respond with, quote, yes, he did. He said he was a scumbag, he was a rat, a troublemaker, and a bad kid. This was problematic for Vincent Basciano. Not only was he jammed up in this murder, but he was involved with conspiracies to kill Patrick DiFilippo. He was involved with the conspiracy to kill the girlfriend of Dom Cicali as well. This was a lot of a problem for Vincent Basciano. Ultimately, Dominic Cicali would flip. As we know, Joey Massino would flip. Pretty much everyone involved with this conspiracy would flip. And Vinny Gorgeous would basically face the end of the road in the conspiracy as well. As far as the government, they would allege he would also kill an individual called Frank Santoro. And also the government would try to include charges that he ordered the assault of an individual called Frank Porco. Now, I connect this, interestingly enough, due to this video because it connects to an individual I've talked about before. In 2019, Sylvester Sally Dazzatola's body was found in a McDonald's parking lot. He was an associate of the Bonanno Crime Family, an associate of Vincent Basciano. The Porco assault would actually be done for Zatola, according to the government. So Vincent Basciano is very connected with that individual as well, Sally Dazzatola, who was a big-time Joker poker machine wise guy in the Bronx. So the writing was on the wall for Vinny Gorgeous Basciano. He would face a trial, and in July of 2007, he would be found guilty on most counts and in multiple murders. He would also have to face another trial in the hit on Randolph Randy Pizzola. Now, in that trial, he would have to face the testimony of his former friend, Dom Cicali. Now, during this time, he would go back to holding and he would send a letter to a girlfriend, Vincent Basciano. He would state, as far as the testimony of Dom Cicali, quote, "It broke my heart after learning about the testimony of Dom Cicali." These guys were friends. These guys were partners forever. And this is the treachery that sometimes the mob is all about. Ultimately, for Vincent Basciano, he would be found guilty and face the death penalty. Luckily for him, though, he wouldn't have to face the death penalty. In July of 2011, he would get life in prison without the possibility of parole. Recently, Vincent Basciano has moved around, and he still sits in federal prison. Vincent Basciano still looks similar. He still has the coiffed hair. He still looks like the guy we know him from. In a letter penned to a reporter several years ago, Vincent Basciano would talk about his life in the mob and where he goes from here, as he likely will die in federal prison. He would, quote, say, "I'd rather die than compromise my values. I'm one of the few that followed the rules." As we know, being a rat in the mob is trendy nowadays. One individual that never wavered on who he was Vincent Basciano. Was he a lunatic? Absolutely. Did he do some things late in his career as boss? Absolutely. But we can't knock the rise he had in the Mafia. Pretty incredible. He probably was one of the last of the Mohicans in the American mob. As always, if you enjoy this video, I urge you to hit the like button and make sure you subscribe. Sorry about the length of the video. I wanted to try to include as much as I can. We'll see you next time here on the Sitdown.